So our new VP of People, Ginny Lisk, who's an amazing talent that we'll be getting on the podcast at some point. Fairly recently, it was a couple of months back, which is why I'm a little vague on this, but I will procure the link and put it in show notes. But she shared with me a progressive talk, a video of a talk that was being done about the more modern way to construct a people team, which is sort of formally known as HR, but people are trying to move away from that term because it's quite loaded with the past and how traditional HR worked, and a modern people team works quite differently. And her proposal was that a people team is actually much more than the classic HR function, and is actually more like a people operations team. And I mean, the whole talk's quite interesting in terms of the sort of skills needed in a modern people team to do that, and that's probably something for another time. But one of the elements of the skill set in that modern people team was effectively skills not dissimilar to marketing, in terms of employer branding. Employer branding is a key part of recruitment and attracting talent. And it involves design, it involves copywriting, it involves figuring out your ICPs, right? Which is who your customer profiles are. But these are the profiles of people you're recruiting, not the people you're necessarily selling to. Now, historically, we're going to do this podcast about employer branding and where that sits and what's important about it, because it's something we're coming up with a lot against now. Now, historically, and this is what I've heard from other companies too, that anything with the word brand associated to it naturally fits in with the marketing team. And that kind of makes sense, right? Because that's where your brand experts live. But I have always found with almost every marketer I've worked with, which have usually been great and people I liked, but I have found that things like the careers page and the about pages and those kind of pages on the website, they're often the thing that goes maybe in the day before go live. They don't get much love. They rarely get updated. And I'm not necessarily convinced that the marketing team would understand the kind of profiles and personas. And they could if they put their minds to it, but I'm not sure they really have the time or the energy. And they're commercial. It's a commercial team. And this is a commercial thing, but so basically, I'd like to explore that the relationship between marketing and people, and actually, our belief is that really anything employer branding should live inside of a people operations team, assuming you've got the right skills in that team, and should be supported by marketing. The more I think about it, the more I realize that a people team and a marketing team are almost identical. What do you think? I mean, like if you think about it. It's a funnel, right? You're going out, you're advertising online.
Yeah, no, I think it's exactly the same sort of principle. So for a start, if you think about competition, when you're a company, you've got competition for customers. If you're on the marketing, sales and marketing side, but obviously you've got competition for talent if you're on the people side. So it's the same kind of principles, isn't it? It's like, okay, well, we're not the only rodeo in town. We want to kind of hire the best talent. So one of the things we need to do is to present ourselves in the best way. And also, I think that in many ways as well, the experience bit, the customer experience, when you come to the website as a customer, a potential customer, you're looking for clues, you're looking for sort of reasons why you would choose this company over another company. And I think it's exactly the same for employees or potential employees.
And the analogy stretches on from there, because when you're in the interview process, that's basically like trial, right? You're in the trial process. You're negotiating with the sales team, commercial team. You're learning more about the company, which is effectively the product, and and then there's onboarding, right? Once you've say, right, we're going to sign up and do it, then it's customer success. You're being onboarded through.
You've got expansion and you've got churn as well.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, exactly. Expansion,
or upselling, maybe. Yeah,
Well, promotion.
Yeah, promotion. Yeah.
I mean, basically, it's the same thing, and I suppose it's beyond marketing. It goes into customer success. I mean, it's a huge, huge role. But I wonder how many people, how many companies actually think of it in that way.
I think an important thing to say as well is that although correct in saying that maybe it's not marketing's priority. What is obviously key is that the brand values, if you like, need to. You can't have those two things operating as silos and saying, well, the people brand values are completely different to our customer brand. There's company values that should stray across. So if you think about companies like Basecamp, that part of their brand is the way that they treat their people. I mean, they've taken it to an extreme, and people like Dan Price from Gravity Payments, who famously, said, right, everybody gets paid at least $70,000, including myself. So, that's an extreme, but basically what you kind of get from that as a potential customer is like, okay, well, there's clear values that they have around the way they treat their people, and that I buy into that, and therefore I like that company more. And it's probably the same with Basecamp. So I think it's really important. And if those things mismatch, if you've got if your company brand value is all about, honesty and doing the right thing, and then you treat your employees like shit, then clearly that's going to...
But why would that have any... I mean, that would be a fundamental problem, right? I mean, that would be... You basically would be recruiting a team. I mean, I think it's more likely to go the other way, right? Like, you hear... how often do you see like this very kind of... I mean, let's be like... Modern internet companies, brands normally are super kind of woke, basically. They're like, we're totally relaxed and cool and da-da-da. And then you often hear that behind the scenes they're just like a monster mess of like stress and pain and bullying and stuff like that. I mean, ultimately it's down to the people team to be making sure that the company's actually operating in a good, engaging, fair way that's attracting the right talent, that's treating people right, but also is motivating and all that. So I kind of those two teams need to totally work together. I just to date I've always found that the moment you bring up that anything to do with employer branding is nothing to do with marketing or minimal to do with marketing supported, that every single marketer, I can make no exceptions here, has had a problem with that. They've always been like, no, but it's a bit land grabby. I've never got why, because I've always found, okay, but why has the careers page not been updated in 3 years then if it's so important? But it literally to a person, I've always had this problem, and I've never understood it. Now, obviously, if the people team aren't skilled enough to sort of, they're not confident with copyright. But the thing is, they copyright all the time because they write and help on loads of job descriptions, and a job description is basically an ad, and in that job description it's a fully fleshed out ad and landing page effectively. You're going through the various elements of a role, but also the company. I mean, if you can't sell the company, then you really don't have a very good people team, because your people team are pitching you. They're telling your story. They're the first contact with company is normally a screening call or whatever. So really, they're doing it.
There probably is a sense in the way that internal comms is the poor cousin of external comms, or it's a similar sort of thing. It's like, well, yeah, HR. I mean, or people. I mean, in my, I'm trying to think back to the days. My very first job, I worked at The Economist, and there was a really strong people team there. But yeah, they weren't. You wouldn't kind of think that they were kind of branding people, or marketing people.
The thing that's changed, I suppose, is how people would literally apply to roles at The Economist and how The Economist would market itself. That probably didn't overlap hugely.
That was my first job working in the marketing department at The Economist, and it was such a great insight into how to police and manage a brand. I mean, they were so good at it, and it was a very strong. I don't know if you remember visually, white reversed out of red kind of type, very pithy, sort of to the point kind of thing. There was a style guide that everyone was given, which showed you how to write, and I still write with that in mind. It was drilled into me so badly. That it's kind of stuck with me, but I think that's possibly where maybe that's where the kind of confusion arises as well. Where the marketing says, well, it's got to. What we don't want is, as you say, the people team are probably not graphic designers, and they probably don't have graphic designers. So there is probably definitely a need to make sure that something looks consistently visually. But I think if the company's brands is understood across the board, like not just, sorry, dog barking now, the perils of podcasting from home. Yeah, if as long as, I think everybody in the company needs to understand the brand, right? Like what the brand values are, and then that needs to be clearly articulated. But it is one of those things, I think, as you say, like in the past, maybe it's not been seen as that important. It's kind of like, well, look, this is just an admin function. You apply, you send in your CV, your resume or whatever, you apply for the job, and then you get a contract. Whereas I think what we've kind of learned is actually it's way more nuanced than that. People choose companies or not choose companies based on lots of things, and they do really value. I mean, in all the interviews I'm doing now, I'm constantly talking about the company's values and what we think is important, and why we think that diversity in views and locations and people and backgrounds is a really important thing, and how that's helped us. Those sorts of things it seems to be really important in interviews now, whereas it wouldn't have been 20 years ago. It would have been like,
yeah. It's much more. Also, I mean, there is another overlap, in which case almost all of these journeys kind of originate to some degree at your website, right? Like, your website is a multifunctional thing. I mean, obviously, you think of our website mainly as customer and product, effectively the sales element of that, the marketing and sales of that. But actually, it is also where people go to find out about the business, and
well, I know
and what.
whenever we've done sort of, not so much with ScreenCloud, because there's so much going on, and you also access the product through the website. But certainly in previous lives, when we were running an agency, the most visited page was the About Us page, because clearly that's what people were trying to, like, do we want to work with these guys? Are they the real deal kind of thing? So it's true. It's like, yeah, people.
I think that's the thing. Employer branding, I think, actually matters to customers too. Like, say, like they want to work with suppliers that I actually, in a lot of the RFPs and things like that, a lot of the sections are about people and policies and how we treat people and things like that. So that's kind of like, they want ethical suppliers. So there's a merging in this, but there's definitely a sense where I feel, if you've got two really strong teams, it needs separating out. Then you really sing, right? Because suddenly to that team, this is the most important thing that they work on, like one of the most important things that they work on. In the same way that, like, the key landing pages of our website are one of the most important things that the marketing team thinks about. And suddenly you level up these sections by giving, but it's interesting. Yeah, I think obviously my mind's made up of, like, this doesn't live in marketing. It just doesn't make sense to me. It's interesting though, where, like, this kind of overlaps. And I suppose, to be fair to marketing a bit on this, a lot of people will judge whether they're going to work somewhere on the way the product's sold and the way the product's presented as well. So you want to work for somewhere where you think the product's good, and so there is an element at play there. So, but I think what you're saying is very relevant. It's interviews now are so cross-functional in the subjects that you touch when people are evaluating who they're going to work with, and us evaluating who we're going to work with. And yeah, you will go all the way through from those things all the way through to, even if it isn't necessarily a commercial role, they want to know about the growth projections of the company. They want to know, actually, half of them want to know what your exit plan is. Like, there's a lot that can be covered in attracting talent, and at the end of the day, like, you don't need lots of talent to run a successful SaaS company, but you do need good talent. It's not an army of people you need, but my God, they need to be good. And the best people in SaaS, they've all got options, regardless of recessions, COVID, whatever. Like, they've all got options.
And I think the other thing is, as well, is that if you get it wrong, like with if you screw up your brand, like, it can take years to recover. Remember Ratner's? I don't know, this is probably a uniquely British thing, but there was a jeweler's shop in the UK called Ratner's that had that sold, let's say, kind of the cheaper end of the jewelry market, and the CEO or the founder, whatever, joked some kind of public dinner about how rubbish the product was, and it got out, and people still, those people. Why would you ever buy jewelry from someone who says that it's rubbish? Like, everyone understood that it was cheaper, but you wouldn't necessarily, it just devalued it. And it's the same with employee brand. Sorry. If I'm not going to name names, but there was a company a couple of years ago where it came out about how badly they were, how much pressure they were putting on their staff, and not even people in probation and everything had to do some pretty difficult, borderline kind of unethical things to get through. And there was a lot of it, it was shared a lot on social media, and I think they did take a bit of I'm sure they've recovered now, but there is as much value to losing your brand, employee brand value as your consumer brand value. And you've got things like Glassdoor and stuff like that, and people are very, very happy to share their experiences. They can share them anonymously and things like that. I could create a false persona, go onto Twitter and start slagging off our customers if I wanted to. I wouldn't, but and the same thing can happen with Glassdoor. You could even have competitors sort of. So there is definitely. I'm not saying that is what happens.
I think there's some validation, like through LinkedIn, of you having a role there. I don't think you can game it quite that easily. But I'm not entirely. I've never been on that side of the fence really, so I don't know.
Sometimes things don't work out with a company, right? And it doesn't mean that you're a horrible person or that the company's a horrible person. You're just not a right fit. I don't
think I know a company where that hasn't been the case.
Yeah, if you're on the receiving end, you quite understandably might feel quite bitter about that and want to kind of take revenge. So yeah, you can see that these things are really key, and I think it's super important. My kind of sense is that we ultimately when we had Beth, who was talk about Beth. She left a little while ago, but she was our first kind of content person. And I think what she was quite good at doing was kind of looking across the whole of the organization. And there probably is an element of that, but I think where the content originates from, it does make sense that it comes from the people team. There probably does need to be some kind of, not exactly a police person, but maybe someone who's, I think at least, making sure that it's visually on brand.
Which is I mean, I know you just, it was a flippant term, but like policing is like, it should be supported by, right? So it's like, I think, and this is a kind of an interesting weighting that I've seen in the sort of the power dynamic. It's not like submit your ideas to us and we'll tell you if they're okay, which is, I think, is kind of how it's been done in the past. I'm like, no, turn that on its head. We own this and we need your support to make it better. But like, if we trust that team to go out into the world and sell our company and attract the best talent, we should trust them to write a few paragraphs for the careers page. But they could do a hell of a lot more damage every day than that.
I think probably what I sort of talked about The Economist and the style guide, and that's probably quite extreme because they had a style guide. I mean, literally, it's a book. You can buy it on Amazon, I think. But that's because they had journalists, right? And the journalists in The Economist specifically weren't bylined, so you never saw who wrote so everybody had to write in The Economist style. It wasn't like,
I'd love to have seen their job descriptions. Was that in The Economist style?
It would have been, there would have been style guides. I mean, I don't know how extremely they were applied, but certainly in marketing copy, the journalists and the marketing people had the same book, basically, which was, and it was down to things like how you would write numbers. Do you write a number, the number 3, or do you spell it out, THREE, and things like that? But it doesn't need to be, it doesn't need to be policed as much, but they're probably, especially if you've got more than, and especially if you've got multiple people, sort of articulating that brand. And actually you do, just by default, like you say, like the product, the product is an expression of our brand. The marketing site is an expression of our brand. Job descriptions and adverts are an expression of our brand.
Even how our finance team reach out to unpaid or overdue invoices, right? The tone of voice in that, like that's a critical relationship moment. Like that's a key part of branding. It's like, yes, we kind of need to be firm if people are taking the piss and not paying their bills. Like they've got to, it can't stay all like, oh, hiya, like it can't be all that. But likewise, it's kind of important to strike the right tone of seriousness but fairness, and to reflect back on that as well. So there's key things that brand touches, which I think often get overlooked, in the melee of growth and where it happens. I mean,
But that's the thing. I mean, we're all kind of, it was like, we've got to get things done. We've got to get action done. And yeah, you suddenly find that a developer has put some kind of little instruction and it's completely off brand or whatever. It's a challenge, I guess. And it's one of those things as you get bigger.
do you think there's also a challenge about the word brand, like with people who aren't in that? Because it almost is like telling a developer that their error message is off brand could be met with this reaction of like, oh, for fuck's sake,
Yeah, it could do.
is there
Yeah.
nothing you like fluffy marketing people don't want to touch? But actually, it's like it matters. But is it explained right? Like, no, it's not. It's off brand. Like, oh, we don't use that word. We use this word instead. It's actually no, because this will trigger the wrong reaction. This is because this is not consistent with the relationship. Because really, I think brand is consistency. That's really what it's ultimately about. I mean, it's consistency and then what it tells you. But to achieve consistency across a large organization is incredibly hard, especially with all these multidisciplinary people. And the brand is there to give guidance on how to be consistent, so that from a customer point of view, when you touch all of these different parts of the business in your life cycle as a customer, that it doesn't feel like you're dealing with someone with like 50 different personalities. It's like sometimes you're nice, sometimes you're deadly serious, sometimes you're a bit of an arsehole.
Yeah.
That's what it's really trying to achieve. And then I suppose a higher thing than that is it's trying to also to project like something in a very simple way, which is quite complicated, which is like quality, what we stand for, like what we're about, where we're going, who we're appealing to. Like it's a complicated thing, but it's often for people that don't work in it and have to actually try and define a brand, which is bloody hard, by the way, even though it might just look like a few simple things. Also, it's actually how early can you do a brand? We're 5 years in, still feels like we're still figuring it out.
Yeah. I think there's probably things that we can, like, if people understand, like, A, what we think is right and what we think is wrong, and B, the way we like to talk to customers, or we like to talk about ourselves, or so we don't want to use 5 words where 1 word would do, and we want to be conversational but not informal, we're still being respectful. We can start to articulate that, I think, and then in theory, everybody who has any contact with the outside world should be able to take that and say, okay, I understand that. Like, does this feel right? Does this sort of feel like it's okay? But I mean, if you're going down to,
and if you flip that all the way around, where you would get that training would be in your onboarding.
Yeah.
Where you would get brand training would be part of your onboarding process, which would live with the people team, ironically, even though it probably would be defined a lot by the marketing team. Which is kind of
I suppose what's really key from this conversation is actually quite how important employee branding is, and it probably hasn't been in the past. And then it does throw up that thing of like, well, if it's so important, how do you make sure that it's done properly? And then it feels like, in the people team that we have, or certainly with Ginny, clearly this is quite high up in her, because she, as you say, she's a kind of modern, she's got a modern approach to this. This is pretty high up in her sort of priority list. She's not, she would be thinking about this a lot. So I think I suppose it would be difficult if we had someone who was literally, look, I just do admin here. I just get people in the door and get them signed up. I don't really care. Like, I mean, I'm sure there's not that many people, sort of people. That...
Well, no, but in fairness, but it's not. You wouldn't recruit a leader of a team of like, I think our people team is like 6 or 7 people now, that would think like that. But to be honest, the first person that's people oriented that you'll probably hire as you're growing will be someone who's more on the administrative side. Because I mean, a lot of the people work there's a huge administrative amount of work that goes into running a company, and like everything from payroll and onboarding. I mean, there is a lot, just even, onboarding, offboarding, getting people their licenses, getting them set up, getting them like there's a lot of admin, like just like there's a lot of admin in every department, but there is a huge admin burden in the people side. And if you're like, when you're very small, obviously the people side is going to be exclusively done by the founders, pretty much. So the first thing you would probably want to offload is some of that administrative burden because it just gets quite overwhelming, and you've got other priorities to spend your time on, such as sales or product. And therefore, it makes sense that the first person in, which has always been the case with us, which I don't think was bad and actually was super useful, to be honest, was someone really helping with that. But then probably who actually probably would have had the skills, but maybe didn't have the confidence right then to kind of really take that part on, and would have naturally probably seen a much more competent team in marketing that had the skills to kind of do what they were trying to do. So it would have created that dynamic of like, look, here's what I need, here's the stuff I need, but can you help me like write it and get it up on the site and all that kind of thing. And maybe that just grows, maybe that's like the acorn to which this slightly dysfunctional tree grows. And then you get to a point now where you're like, actually, I want to pull this away. And there is resistance, right? But as I said, it's not everyone I've ever known has had this resistance but to me, actually, it empowers your people team to be more than the classic definition of HR. And then it also puts the onus on them to find the skills, whether they're using freelance to help on certain graphics and things like that, but it's on them to deliver, right? Whereas if they always feel disenfranchised, then you're never going to recruit the best people in because it's not actually a dynamic enough role for them, because ultimately they're being policed by another team, which actually isn't spending much of their working hours thinking about this.
What you don't want, I don't think, is an HR team basically saying, we've basically decided that we're going to completely do everything. We're going to change everything from ScreenCloud's colors to blue, kind of thing. Or you're like, oh no, yeah, that's an extreme example. So I think you do need to work. I like everything. We need to collaborate, but I know what you mean about the ownership. That makes sense. Yeah.
Sorry, I had because I couldn't remember who it was. I want to give a credit to the person. So I've had a Slack, so I can tell you. So the woman that did this presentation is called Jess Hayes, and she works at Whereby, which is another Point 9 portfolio company. And I think the video is online. I don't think it's behind a firewall. It was Point 9 do quite a lot of internal conference talks and things like that. But I think a lot of them end up going online anyway that aren't sensitive. So it's a really good talk. It's about 45 minutes long, I think.
Everyone really should be a marketer, and it makes sense that the people team would have responsibility for the content that comes out of the people team. But I also think that it needs to be joined up, like, and it's probably marketing that need to make, as you say, support in a supportive way rather than a policing way. But they need to be defining the visual look and feel, maybe defining the tone of voice. But again, I don't think the marketing team would ever say we have the authority of the tone of voice. I think it's a collaborative thing, but maybe they're just they're.
I want to dig into that a little bit more because I actually don't know the answer on this. My gut is that the tone of voice you set with your marketing towards your ICP and your customer, like the ICP of our customer is not the same ICP, like ideal customer profile, right? It's the profile of our customer is not necessarily the same profile. I mean, I'd even go and say that you can't just have one tone of voice in your people team, because where you're trying to appeal to a developer is very different to trying to appeal to a salesperson. I mean, they're quite different characters. So I don't know if you can have one universal tone of voice that appeals to all, or is the right thing for all.
Yeah, well, it depends what you mean. Like, so tone of voice to me is things like, how formal we sound, how precise we are with our language, rather than kind of, is it technical, isn't it technical? I think so. So, for example, you might, let's say our tone of voice is super kind of overly. I don't know. Think about if you were a children's, a kind of funky kids brand or something. You might have quite a kind of very informal way of talking. Like imagine Moshi Monsters.
Well, yeah,
Imagine what their
you're appealing
job
to a
descriptions were like.
5-year-old, but then you're actually trying to hire a 25-year-old. I mean, that would surely be a different tone of
Yeah,
voice.
but well, the content would be different, but I think the tone, you would have certain principles within your tone of voice around
The
how
reason
you,
I
how
ask
you
is
might
like
talk.
if you went into different Slack channels, right, Slack groups of different teams, I think you see different tone of voice in how they communicate with each other. Developers tend to be much more, say, dry in their humor. Like we might say, yeah, we like humor in what we do, but developer humor can be a little on the dark, dry side, right? Like that's kind of a bit ironic and all that sort of thing. That's normally what you kind of see in there. Whereas you see quite a different sort of humor in the marketing team, people team, and then quite a different humor in the sales team. And I suppose I'm trying to explore like if that's truly that's a natural tone of voice of our teams, and I wouldn't want to go in and change that. So why would our tone of voice in our employer branding not reflect the tone of voice of the teams?
I think maybe conflate. To me, tone of voice isn't really about humor. Well, it could be, but it's to do with like if you imagine if you were applying to a bank, you would expect a very formal kind of sort of language, and maybe sort of quite a lot of legal type language. Whereas if you were applying to, I would say Moshi Monsters, they don't exist anymore, but like just because we used to work with them, but you would, there would be some kind of quirky things like come and become one of the Moshlings.
I think I see what you mean. I think you're talking about like an overarching tone of voice, but I think when you get into, say, a job description, I think that if you were going to say write anything that might be humorous in the job description, it would have to appeal to the humor, the classic humor of the sort of people. If you were ever doing that, and I think you can put a bit of
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, you don't want it to all sound like it's come out of a kind of machine. Yeah,
yeah. But I think if me and you wrote a job description for a developer, I think we would suck. It would be okay, but I think if Luke wrote it, it would be better. Or at least he might not get all the fundamentals of what he needs to get in there because he's not like classically trained people person. But if he took the kind of here's the raw information that needs to be covered in this job description, now make it us, he would write a more appealing job description. He would make it because he's that world, right? He's in that world. He knows those people. He works with those people, and they work for him. And I think that he would nail that tone of voice. And I think that if we did it, it would sound like we were trying to sound like that.
yeah. But I think the thing is with anyone like Luke, well, all of us, I guess, is that we probably quite naturally know our tone of voice because we've lived with it for such a long time. So you would be able to adapt it in that way. You'd say, yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's the skill, isn't it? It's like saying, how do I make this sound like ScreenCloud, but appealing to the particular person that this is.
But it's the version of ScreenCloud that they're most likely to touch, right? Because if they go into their office when we can go back, and the 10 people around them have a certain characteristics, because we don't want everyone to be the same. We also that doesn't exist. Like the characteristics of a salesperson and of a developer are really quite different, especially also when you take geography into account, like Bangkok versus LA. I mean, pretty different places. And so what we've always said is we're not trying to look for clones, because one, I think I don't really know why, and it's impossible. There is some key ethical value. But in terms of like literally the tone of voice, that's in the literal language you use, I feel that should be localized. That should be, again, me writing a job description for a developer in Bangkok is never going to sound authentic.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It does need to sound authentic. And I think that's the challenge, isn't it? It's like, how do you make it sound authentic while still making it
consistent-ish.
consistent with ScreenCloud.
Basically, it's bloody hard. That's why everyone sucks at it, right?
Yeah.
So,
that's why there's branding consultants, isn't there? And,
well, yeah, it's true. But again, with a branding consultant, I wonder if these days branding consultants. I mean, I've never had much experience in that world, in fairness, and the world we were in was almost exclusively marketing. So anything branding was really all about like outside world branding to customers. But I'm guessing they must also have been doing employer branding too, and maybe for the bigger companies, that's what they also maybe had different divisions for that. I think it'd be interesting. I mean, I'm a bit out of my knowledge depth on that one, but I always found the process of doing branding, even though the deliverables may be quite initially simple. The process of doing branding is extraordinarily hard. It's
And I guess that's one of the things. The other thing with startups as well is that you're kind of constantly told very much at the beginning as well, like, don't waste your time worrying too much about this shit, because that classic thing where you get a startup and they spend 3 months kind of coming up with the logo and I don't know if this font's right or that color.
And in fairness, that's right. That is right.
Yeah. But
I think the brand should just fall out of the founders and fall out of the product. The brand will just fall out naturally, at least the initial version of it.
Yeah. And then
and it'll be set. The values will be set by the initial team, and it will evolve. But there is a point where you need to go, all right, enough now.
Yeah.
We've got too many damn people doing too many different things, and we need to actually get this sorted. So that's basically the stage we're at, if you hadn't already guessed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the past, when I've seen, again, I used to work on the marketing side. I used to occasionally work with brand consultants. I'm trying to think back to some of the kind of brand guidelines and specifically the tone of voice guidelines, and it was very broad. It would be like, it would show examples. It would go, instead of writing a sentence like this, think about it more like this, and it would be that kind of thing. So it definitely wouldn't be saying this is how you write a job description. Sorry,
it's like educational almost, really.
Yeah, it would just get people thinking, like, instead of using, I don't know, I wish I could think of some examples, but it would be like, here's an example of a sentence that sounds very formal. Here's an example of a sentence that does the same thing, but in a less formal way. This is the way we do it, sort of thing. It would be like that.
Okay, yeah. I think that could probably work. And then I think, like all good guidelines, there's always room for maneuver, right?
You can't. Yeah.
You apply the guidelines, except when there's exceptions, but you've at least considered why. Like, I'm deliberately breaking this guideline in order to achieve this, right? So you at least acknowledge that you're doing it, and you're doing it with deliberate action. And if you do something deliberately with thoughtfulness, normally you're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Normally.
Yeah. I think my example of the Economist Star Guide was probably a bad one, actually, in some ways, because it was predominantly designed for journalists. So it would have things like, the first time you mention Donald Trump, you call him President Trump or whatever. And then anywhere else in the story, you can refer to him as Mr. Trump or something like that. It would be those
or the president, whatever.
Yeah, it would be those sorts of things, which for anyone else, it doesn't. That's irrelevant. But you could see that would.
I would quite like that to be how, So when you're referring to the CEO,
dear leader.
Dear leader, lower your eyes and and put in bold.
And don't ever address him directly. Always direct him through one of his minions.
Yeah. It's like, and never turn your back. You always have to exit the room. Isn't that what we have to do with the Queen? You can't turn your back on the Queen. I'd totally fail at that. I know I would. Anyway. So we call it that one? I don't know if that was useful for anyone. I actually, if it is any of our team listening or people that work for us, I don't mean it badly. It's just, you just observe natural tension. And I think because I've seen this throughout everywhere I've worked, it's a universal thing. It's not it's not like an individual calling out thing. It's just something I've always seen, and I kind of find it interesting. And I'm learning a lot, the people. And it's not something I ever thought I'd really be If I rewind my life 5 years, I didn't think that I would be thinking about how modern people teams work. But because I've basically been in the thick of it for a while,
I'm not surprised, actually, because when I think back to our agency days, you generally did more of the team people stuff, I think, than.
No, that's true. Yeah, you're right. No, I did do it, and I did it because it was, but I did it slightly, not reluctantly. I did it because, slightly selfishly, if I'm honest, right? Like, I want to work with the best people I can, right? Because I'm someone who likes to. I'm a doer, right? I was always in the production side of things. I was, I did some new business, but normally towards the tail end, and normally at the point that I was like customer success, I guess is what you would call in SaaS. And like, I can only deliver the best products I could deliver for my customers and keep my customers happy and grow them and do all of those things if I had an awesome team. Like I couldn't do it. I just needed the best developers, designers, project managers, all the other people I needed. I needed them to be good, and the good ones, I needed the good ones to stay, and get on with each other. Or the other thing, yeah, and not hate each other, and like actually work together. So that's where my people passion came from. Was just it was more that than the actual act of running a great people team, because we couldn't afford that. So that bit was almost like, oh God, I've got to go and do interviews and things again. Like it was, but it was more. I was driven to it because of the end result and how much the end result mattered to me.
Yeah, I suppose there's also an element of building a company that you yourself want to work in, because like we have to spend every day in this company, and if it's horribly toxic and
Totally, I mean, I want to like the people I work with. That's why even a talented arsehole is still an arsehole.
Which is why, when we do things like ScreenCloud Together, which is where in normal times we try and get everyone together in the same part of the world, like it's a great experience, because as a founder, you kind of like, wow, look at all these people. Like, I don't know,
there is nothing better than working with genuinely good people that you like. I mean, that is the joy of work, right? Including customers, right? Like, working with a customer who you just like, you respect them. They're intelligent. They're on it. I'm going to go onto a call soon with like one of my favorite customers. Not I love them all. Right? It's like a big family, but I'm looking forward to chat with him. I'm really looking forward to hearing from him and what he's thinking, and like I learn from him, and there's loads of other ones like that too, and also I like him. He's a good guy. Like I enjoy it. It's a meeting I'm looking forward to, and there are loads of other ones like that. But I'll be honest, there are also times where it doesn't go like that, where it's kind of frustrating. You feel yourself getting I find myself sometimes get a bit grumpy and like a bit agitated because I'm not gelling with the people, or I'm not really, to be honest, not really respecting the people enough. Like I just don't think they're good enough, and therefore that brings out a not as good a side in me, a frustrated side. And so that's why this is so important, because when you get it right, God, it's easier, but it's not that. It's more fun, and you get things done, and you achieve, and you feel more fulfilled, and that's why this stuff is crucial. All right. Well, thanks very much for listening. If you've got all the way to the end, and check out Jess Hayes' video, it's actually genuinely good. It's probably better than what this podcast was. So do that. Bye.